Hello everyone, I am Simona and today I'll be presenting the victim and aggressor narrative, how the Baltic states portray the Israel-Palestine conflict. My focus is on how media and political messaging in Lithuania, Latvia and Estonia frame this very complex and emotional conflict. To understand the present-day conflict, we need a short historical look. So after World War II, many Jews were looking for a safe homeland and the UN proposed splitting Palestine into two states. Jewish leaders declared Israel's independence, which led to the Arab-Israeli War. This event planted roots for today's ongoing tensions and narratives. To start, I wanted to share this meaningful quote by Robert Kennedy: one person's freedom fighter is another person's terrorist. This captures the idea of narratives, how sides are portrayed as either victims or aggressors depending on who's telling the story. So my main question is, how do the Baltic countries portray this conflict through media and political actions? And why does this portrayal matter? To find answers, I used a qualitative thematic analysis method. Also, to find credible articles and news sources, I used Google and Google Scholar. I focused on key political moments and the media coverage from each Baltic country and looked at how the conflict was framed. Now, before diving into how the media frames the conflict, I wanted to briefly show how the governments of Estonia, Latvia, and Lithuania responded to it at the political level. Let's start with Estonia. What's interesting here is that Estonia was one of the Baltic states that voted in favor of UN resolution calling for the end of Israel's occupation of Palestinian territory. That might sound like a pro-Palestinian position, but Estonia later explained their decision carefully. Their foreign minister emphasized that it was part of a wider commitment to international law and a rule-based order. Estonia also stressed that they made the decision after consulting with their Baltic neighbors, showing they didn't want to act alone. Their approach was very diplomatic and cautious. Moving on to Latvia, their political messaging was much more clearer and stronger in tone. Right after Hamas attacks, the Latvian parliament quickly issued statements fully supporting Israel's right to defend itself, using very emotional and moral language, like condemning terrorism and showing unconditional solidarity. The Latvian government didn't try to stay neutral. Instead, their framing was very black and white. Israel is defending itself and Hamas is the aggressor. And finally, Lithuania. After the start of 2023 war, Lithuania's president and prime minister made several public statements expressing solidarity with Israel. In one case, Lithuania even voted at the UN in favor of resolutions that supported Israel or avoided criticizing it too directly. However, their government has also been careful not to completely ignore the suffering in Gaza. That's why Lithuanian media, like the public broadcaster LRT, described the country's position as balancing between principles and alliances. In other words, Lithuania supports Israel but doesn't want to appear too one-sided, especially because it also wants to stay consistent with international law and human rights norms. So already at this level, the political level, we can see different tones. Estonia takes a more legalistic and coordinated stance, Latvia takes a pro-Israel moral stance, and Lithuania tries to walk a fine line between the two. Now let's look at how media coverage in these countries reflects or reinforces those political stances. I've included 3 real headlines from each country, and each one says more than it might seem at first. Let's start with Estonia. Their headline is from the official government page and says, Estonia supports UN General Assembly resolution on ending Israel's occupation. Now this headline is careful. It doesn't say Estonia condemns Israel or supports Palestine. It says Estonia supports a UN resolution. That's a diplomatic move. They're framing it as a legal decision made within the rules of international institutions. So Estonia is not picking sides emotionally, but instead presenting themselves as a country that follows international law. Now Latvia. Their headline is Latvia pledges unwavering support to Israel's legitimate right to defend itself. This headline is very emotionally charged. Words like unwavering support and legitimate defense show clear approval of Israel's military actions. There's no mention of Palestinian suffering or even of the conflict as a two-sided issue. The focus is entirely on Israel's right to respond to attacks. This kind of headline reflects a pro-Israel and the security-focused perspective. Finally, Lithuania. Their headline is from LRT, and it is Lithuania's UN votes on Israel between principles and strategic alliances. What it suggests is that Lithuania is caught between two things. On one side, the principles of human rights and international law, and on the other, the desire to stay close to allies like United States and Israel. The headline shows complexity. Lithuania isn't fully on one side or the other. So just from these headlines, we can already guess each country's position. Estonia is careful and diplomatic, using legal language. Latvia is clearly pro-Israel emotionally and politically. Lithuania is in the middle, trying to balance principles and alliances. Now let's look at the first media excerpt from Estonia. In this case, the article is mostly using diplomatic framing. That means it talks about the conflict using official, neutral, and legal terms, like supporting UN resolution and respecting international humanitarian law. There's no strong emotional language, no direct blame. Estonia's media is showing support for Palestine's rights, but doing it very carefully through international institutions. Another important code here is strategic alignment. The article says Estonia made this move in coordination with other Baltic states. So it's not acting alone. It's showing that this was a collective decision, which helps it avoid criticism from allies. And finally, there's a bit of uncertainty. The article mentions that Estonian officials avoided commenting directly on Israel's actions. That silence tells us something. They don't want to be seen as openly critical of Israel. So even when they support a resolution about Palestine, they still leave space to stay neutral. Overall, Estonia's media is calm, careful, and strategic. It supports international law, but avoids making any bold emotional statements. Now moving on to Latvia. And this excerpt is very different. Here, the article clearly shows an appeal to emotion. It uses strong phrases like unwavering support and condemning terrorist attacks. This kind of language is meant to make the reader feel something: sympathy, anger, or urgency. It creates a very clear picture of Israel as the victim and Hamas as the aggressor. But what's also important here is the quote selective reporting. The article expresses sorrow for Israel's victims, but says nothing about casualties in Gaza. This leaves out half of the story, and that's where the bias becomes visible. By focusing only on one side's suffering, the media shapes public opinion in a certain direction. There's also a strategic alignment here. Latvia mentions solidarity with NATO allies, which suggests that its position is not only emotional, but also political. It wants to stay strongly connected to its Western partners. So overall, Latvia's coverage is emotional, one-sided, and aligned with its political goals. It shows very strong support for Israel without questioning or complicating the story. And finally, Lithuania. This excerpt is full of mixed signals. On the one hand, it shows strategic alignment, just like the other two countries. It mentions that Lithuania supports Israel partly to stay close to the US and European Union. That's a clear foreign policy goal. But at the same time, it talks about moral obligations and concern for civilians on both sides, which points to a more balanced position. There's also some uncertainty here. The article says that there were conflicting remarks about whether Israeli airstrikes violated international law. So even inside Lithuanian government or media, not everyone agrees. That inconsistency makes it harder for the audience to know what the country's real position is. And finally, in the Lithuanian article, there's a factual mistake. It says that Jordan authored UN resolution, but that's not true. The resolution was actually introduced by the United Arab Emirates on behalf of a group of Arab countries. This might seem like a small detail, but it matters. When media gives incorrect information about who wrote the resolution, it can change how people understand who's leading the diplomatic efforts. It might make Lithuania's vote seem more safer or neutral than it actually was. So in short, Lithuania is trying to show both sides, but sometimes it gets messy or unclear. The media here reflects a country that's caught between values and alliances. So to sum everything up, all three Baltic countries support international law and the West. Estonia stays neutral and diplomatic. Latvia is strongly emotional and pro-Israel. Lithuania tries to balance, but often shows internal contradictions. These portrayals reflect not just opinions about the conflict, but also each country's identity, political priorities, and how they want to be seen internationally. Thank you all so much for listening, and if you have any questions, I will be happy to discuss them. And here is my reference list.